How's it going, everybody? My name is Chris Presnell and welcome to my YouTube channel, CPRESFights. So I wanted to touch on Invicta FC 21, Tweet versus Anderson. So I was at the event live. I live just outside of Kansas City. I've been to 4 of their events now that are in Kansas City. I've been to their last 3. And wow, what an organization that has no idea how to put on a bad event. I mean, seriously, can anyone name a bad event that Invicta has put on? All of them have been incredible, and tonight was one of their best ever. I mean, who said that women couldn't finish fights? So many of these fights were finishes. But yeah, let me just break down some of these fights. I'll just go from top to bottom. The first fight was Rachel Ostovich versus Christine Ferea. A very interesting fight. I think a lot of people thought this was kind of a rebound fight for Rachel Ostovich to fight a really unknown fighter making her pro debut. But I didn't see it that way because I studied up on Ferea a little bit and saw that she is a really, really good striker. And so it was really kind of more of a striker versus grappler matchup. And I think that's kind of how it played out. We saw Ostovich going for some takedowns, not enough in my opinion. And it seemed like she was mostly just having a lot of trouble with the athleticism of Ferea. You know, she'd go for a takedown and she was having trouble locking her hands up. She was having trouble getting a hold of her. Ferea was just kind of exploding out of the takedowns that she was throwing. Anytime she got her to the ground, she was able to pop back up. Ferea was able to pop right back up and get back to the feet, and was never really in a bad position. But it took her a little bit of time to find her range. And once she didn't, by the 3rd round, she was just lighting Rachel Ostovich up and was able to finish her off. Moving on to the next fight, that was the Amy Montenegro versus Celine Haga fight. Man, what a crazy story! What a remarkable comeback! Talk about starting your career 1-11, and still wanting to keep going. I think most people would have given up much earlier. I mean, you have 12 fights and you've won 1 of them. How do you, as a fighter, tell yourself to keep going and to keep fighting? And you know, after losing it many times, it's incredible. She, before this fight, was 10-13, which is so incredible. I mean, you know, she trains at Jackson, so that's probably been a big component of her success, but she did okay. I think kind of like the first fight, she struggled a lot with a more athletic, stronger, better conditioned opponent. Celine seemed like she had good conditioning, but she just wasn't strong enough to win a lot of the scrambles. It was so crazy just how it turned out. At the end of the first round, she was in an armbar right at the buzzer, and she tapped. I'm pretty sure she tapped. I looked over at Montenegro's corner, and all of them were screaming, "She tapped, she tapped." And there was some confusion from the people around me. I was pretty sure I saw her hand tap. It was right at the buzzer, so it didn't count. So it was kind of weird. I was wondering how she was gonna keep going from that. She had some good submissions, and then, I mean, obviously the rear naked choke at the end, it definitely should have been a win for her. I mean, she had her in the choke, and then the fight ended, and Amy Montenegro was unconscious, so the fight should have been over. They had the time to make the right call, so why didn't they make the right call? Because it was kind of like the Evinger Kunitskaya fight, which is what it kind of reminded me of. It was just totally influenced by the commission, and the referee, and and that shouldn't happen. And if it's their fault, then the fight should be a no contest. Moving on, the next fight was Andrea Lee versus Ginny Liu, which reminded me a lot of Nunes versus Rousey. Just kind of right off the bat, Andrea Lee comes off so aggressive, just guns a-blazing, all kinds of strikes, kicks, knees, punches, and all different angles. Super, super impressive. Andrea Lee, with this performance, definitely is time to be upgraded from prospect to contender. She looks better with every fight. Her ground game's coming along, and her hands have dynamite in them, and she was able to put Ginny Liu away. After that was the Sijara Eubanks versus Aspen Ladd fight, which I thought was an awesome fight. These two ladies just stood in front of each other and threw down for 15 minutes. Just total slugfest. Amazing fight. Aspen Ladd, super impressive, showing a lot of great footwork, a lot of great angles. The difference was really that she was faster and more dynamic of a striker than Eubanks. Eubanks was a little bit slower, throwing a lot of big winging shots, and Aspen Ladd was able to time them and throw some really nice counters. And Eubanks was all night trying to circle out, but Aspen Ladd kept cutting off the cage and looked really good and doing that. And when Eubanks would try and go to the ground, which I was surprised that Eubanks didn't try to go to the ground more quickly. I mean, that's where she's going to have an advantage over almost anybody in the division. So I don't know why she wasn't going for that immediately. She really didn't need to make this a stand-up fight. I think she is a really good size for the division and really showed some great strength and conditioning, and was able to stop the shot of Eubanks, who's a very athletic fighter. Was able to stop the shot, and even in round 3, I was so surprised that she was going for the takedown against Eubanks and decided to swim into those waters that usually belong to Eubanks and look great. I mean, she got swept and had some back and forth on the ground, but Aspen Ladd, definitely a great fighter that should be fighting for an Invicta belt here soon. Next up was Leah Latson versus Elizabeth Phillips. Late replacement fight that didn't even come together at all for either side until just this week. What a crazy finish, and what an awesome debut for Leah Latson. Not much seen really from each fighter, but what a head kick from Leah Latson, and just laid out a battle-tested veteran like Elizabeth Phillips. Will be interesting to see what happens with her next. I hear that she's going on a deployment soon, and so we may not get to see her for a while. Invicta's done a really good job at developing fighters. I love that they never just throw their up and coming fighters into title fights, even if their divisions are shallow. You think about someone like Aspen Ladd, who's 4-0 or 5-0 in the promotion. She's had the time to really develop into a high quality fighter, and she hasn't been thrown into these number 1 contender fights or title fights prematurely, and having this kind of mixed record, but they've really allowed her to grow and develop. The exact same thing with Megan Anderson. I was so nervous that they were going to throw her to Cyborg, just right off the bat, after a win or two, since the division is so shallow, but they didn't let her develop, and I love that. So just 2 fights left. We had the Raquel Pa'aluhi fight versus Pani Kianzad from Sweden or Iran. So this was a pretty interesting fight that I didn't know how it was going to go. Didn't know how it was going to turn out, but ended up being very dominant for Raquel. She's just really another one of those fighters that just grows so much with every every fight, and this time we really got to see that she has been putting in so much time on the mat. I mean, her ground game was not just, you know, effective, but it was tight, it was dominant. She always had control, you know, flowing from one position to another. You could tell she was thinking ahead, you know, a couple steps, and just not letting, you know, Kianzad get any inch to breathe. I was just super impressed with that, and she was able to get the tap near the end of the round. But now it's time for the main event. What a crazy barn burner of a fight that was. I mean, I just still feel like I'm catching my breath from it all. It was just so fun to be in this space watching Megan Anderson fight in her hometown, you know, adopted hometown, Kansas City. You've got a hometown crowd cheering for you. It's, you know, for a title, it's a main event. It's great watching it on the broadcast and seeing the great fight and getting the commentary, but there's something about being at a fight live. If you've never had that experience before, you have to go and get good seats too, because there's nothing like being in the crowd and just feeling the lift from the people cheering on, you know, their friends, their teammates, and looking around and seeing their family. You know, you got people with the t-shirts with the fighter's name on it, and you're hearing, you know, the buzz from the crowd. And that one was fun because it was just such a pro Megan Anderson crowd. I just loved every moment of that fight. It was so intense. It was so back and forth. Megan started off really strong. She hit her with some really good punches. I think it was after like the second strike, I could see a bunch of redness on Charmaine Tweet's. I think it was after like just 2 strikes, I looked and I could see on Charmaine Tweet's face was really, really red. Megan Anderson didn't have like a totally dominant performance. Charmaine Tweet really hung in there, especially that first round. She caught her with some really good jabs. I could see that Megan Anderson was having a lot of trouble with those jabs. And about halfway through the first round, there was blood coming out of the nose of Megan Anderson, and she kind of had this wide-eyed look on her face. And Charmaine was starting to load up on those jabs and really kind of establish some distance in between. But, you know, was able to just keep that forward pressure and kept her foot on the gas, cut off the cage well. Round 2 came on, and yeah, Megan Anderson just went out the gate and finished her off. And man, that was so crazy. Everyone was up on their feet. I've never seen a crowd at Invicta that loud and that excited. And that was probably even a smaller crowd than usual with the weather problems, but it was great on Megan Anderson for calling out the future UFC 145-pound champ. She's not a perfect fighter. She's still got a lot of holes in her game. She was keeping her hands down low tonight. She was getting hit with a lot of those jabs, not always moving her head very well. And so, you know, she definitely has a lot of room to grow in that. But, you know, she's had a great team. A lot of great minds on that team. I used to train with Glory MMA in Kansas City under guys like James Krause and Zach Cummings. You know, I don't want to just assume that Megan Anderson is going to go immediately to the UFC. I feel like that's not really fair to Invicta, and it assumes a lot, even though it's probably going to happen. I mean, the UFC literally has 2 fighters signed to their 145-pound division right now, and there's not a ton of names out there, and they need every name that they can get. So yeah, they're probably going to sign Megan Anderson, and she's probably, I wouldn't say that she's going to get the first crack at the title. I feel like Chris Cyborg is probably going to get that shot. She should get that shot. I mean, Megan Anderson is the interim title holder, but Chris Cyborg is the undisputed Invicta featherweight champion, so she should get the shot. I mean, there's no one else that, I mean, they should have just given her the belt, let's be honest. They should have just given Cyborg the 145-pound belt and then matched her up with Holly Holm. That's probably what should have happened, but it didn't. I don't want to just assume that Megan Anderson is guaranteed to go to the UFC, because we have no idea if there's an offer on the table. And it always drives me nuts when people see organizations like Invicta as like a feeder promotion to the UFC, because it's really not. I mean, there's a lot of first of all great fighters in Invicta, but there's also divisions that Invicta has that the UFC doesn't. There's a lot of things that, you know, these fighters can do in Invicta that they can't do in the UFC. But, you know, I get it. Like, the UFC is where 95% of all fighters want to be in the UFC. It's like being in the NBA. If you play basketball, everyone wants to be in the NBA. So I get it, but, you know, let's not assume that this is going to happen when we don't even know if there's an offer on the table yet. That being said, if I were a UFC matchmaker and I wanted to sign Megan Anderson, I would say for the UFC 145-pound title picture, you have Holly versus Jermaine fighting next, and obviously, and the winner of that should fight Cyborg, and I think that Megan Anderson should fight another 135-pounder from the UFC that's moving up to featherweight. I think that would make the most sense. Give her another fight to grow and develop, let her get her feet wet in the UFC without it being for gold. I think that would really benefit her well. As far as how she matches up against the current, you know, fighters at that division, I think against Holly Holm she would have a really hard time. I think she would have a really hard time against Holly Holm. Holly Holm is an elite striker, and I think Megan Anderson hits harder than her, but I think Holly Holm's movement is going to be way too much. There's not many people who can outstrike Holly Holm, although Valentina Shevchenko managed to do it. Against Jermaine Durandamy, I could see that being a really good fight. With Jermaine being a little bit more of a power puncher than Holly Holm, that would be a really awesome fight. And a part of me wants Jermaine to win and then Megan Anderson to fight her for the title, just because that would be an awesome fight. I think against Chris Cyborg, that would be still a really tough fight for Megan Anderson right now. She could win. I mean, right now, all four of the fighters directly linked to the UFC's 145-pound division are primarily strikers, which is really interesting. It means that there's a good chance that we're going to have some knockouts coming our way in that division, and man, buckle your seatbelt, because this is going to be a really weird and crazy ride through that 145-pound division to start things off. I mean, think about it. You have Cyborg, Jermaine Durandamy, Holly Holm, and now Megan Anderson's tied with that division as well. That is going to be so insane. But, you know, that's why we watch fights. That's why it's so fun to be a fight fan, because a year from now, we have no idea who's going to be holding that belt. I could very well see it being Holly Holm. I could very well seeing it be Chris Cyborg. That's maybe who I would pick 1 year from now, who's going to be holding that UFC 145-pound belt. But, you know, Megan Anderson, she's coming up, and she's getting better and better. Jermaine Durandamy is someone that you can never sleep on either. So, man, fun times ahead for us fight fans. Can't wait for that to see how it shakes out. Until next time, man, thanks so much for watching my very first video. This has been CPRESFights. We'll see you later and have a good night.